Okay, so we are going to make potato gnocchi with a wild nettle herb pesto with heartwood mushrooms. Heartwood Shane is a wonderful person. He grows fantastic mushrooms. I've been using it since I've gotten here. So this is the final product, a couple stages before I can serve it. Potato gnocchi, it's a potato dumpling that's turned into a pasta. All I've done is I've warmed it up in a pan with a little bit of oil, tried to saute it. This is going to get whipped upstairs and just baked until it gets a nice little toasty and puffy. Louis, thank you Louis very much. So the process is pretty simple. I feel like this is also going to be a bit of a TED talk on how much I dislike recipes, because recipes don't always go according to plan. So potato gnocchi, you can cook the potatoes a million different ways. The amount of flour you add is going to change depending on the day. It's very much like baking bread, where even the moisture in the air really affects it. So I also didn't want to just boil potatoes for you guys, because I'm sure that you guys all know how to peel and boil potatoes. These potatoes have been boiled until they are just tender. So what that means is when you take them out of the hot pot, if you push down on a potato with your spoon, it should start to fall apart immediately. If you undercook it, your gnocchi is going to be too dry and have little bits of rock hard potato. If you overcook it, it's going to be too wet and you have to add way too much flour and the texture is going to be kind of gummy. So it is quite specific on how much you want your potatoes cooked. Another way you can do it is you can bake your potatoes in the skin, usually wrapped with like tin foil, helps the process. That yields a very dry potato flesh, so you might actually have to add water to that, but that's an easier way. I also learned this recipe originally in a restaurant where everything's go, where the potatoes were still boiling hot immediately as you took them out of the pot. I've learned the much more intelligent way is to let them cool to at least room temperature, because why not? These are yellow flesh, so not russets. They're a little too airy, not as waxy. You want a little bit of wax in them. So again, it's just a bowl of cooked potatoes. We're going to add a couple things to it. We have some salt. This is really nice salt. I actually get this from Vancouver Island Sea Salt Company. They harvest their own salt from the ocean. They have nice large flakes as well that you can use for garnish. For this amount of potato, I'm going to use 2 egg yolks, assuming I can separate it correctly. Let's see how we're going to do today. That one wasn't too bad. So we're basically making a pasta, but the potato yields a nice texture, a good flavor, a good bite to it. It has a little bit of a nice chew. I find also that what you can do when we bake them, like I have Louis throwing them in the oven, they puff up and get nice and caramelized on the outside, and it just yields a really, really delicious flavor. I have potatoes, I have egg, I have flour. Again, recipes are going to vary depending on the potatoes. Some potatoes have more moisture, some have less. Depending on how you cook them, you're going to need lots more flour, a little bit less. So I'm going to kind of eyeball it, but I'll show you the texture that we're looking for. We want a little bit of a spring to it. You should be able to roll it out. It might be a little sticky, which is normal. It happens when you're making fresh pasta. So I'm just going to You can. Gluten-free flour obviously doesn't have gluten, so it doesn't have the structure that you're looking for in a pasta. But that doesn't stop people who are desperate for a gluten-free gnocchi. One of the places I worked at, we had a really interesting way of doing it. We used 30% by weight, plus or minus, because of the moisture of the potatoes, of potato starch. It's hard to explain. It's like processing a potato to look like a tubular potato, because then we piped them out. But it holds its texture really well. You can do all the same things. You can blanch it, you can roast it, you can toast it, hold sauces really well. And I found that that's the best way, because whenever I use gluten-free flour, I don't know, if it just seems to have such like a loose texture that you keep adding more and it just becomes really gummy and just not a good mouthfeel. One of the other things, again, recipes can be a bit finicky. If you ever make a gnocchi that's too dense, let's say you added too much flour, it's kind of gummy, it's maybe a bit chewy. You can fix it in a couple ways. Making sure that you do like a nice good roast of them so that they puff up is important and will help. The other option is that you just have a sauce that you cook them in. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be boiling these gnocchi just until they float. Then I'm going to take them out and put them into a pan to roast. If you want, you can boil them until they float. You know they're cooked then, and then you can put them into a sauce and just simmer it in the sauce. And same way that you would simmer like a meat or simmer like a veg to get it soft, you can do the same thing. It'll also have the added benefit of just filling it with flavor of the sauce. So I'm going to roll it out into a little tube, separate it a little bit. You've probably seen gnocchi done shaped a couple different ways. You've seen it like kind of rolled off a fork. I'm sure those are all like Italian regional ways of doing it. I find just chopping it, it has enough surface texture that you can get a good bit of coloring on it. This one doesn't seem too sticky, which is great. It might be the fact that the potatoes are cold. But I'm just going to chop them into little bite-sized pieces. You can do larger ones, you can do smaller ones. I've even seen people have a nice big one that they stuff with cheese, and it's almost like a 2-bite gnocchi. But if you blanch this and then give it a toast, it's delicious. Okay? So I'm gonna push these to the side. I'm gonna dust it with a little bit of flour just to make sure that they don't stick, because they can stick really well. The potatoes are known for that. Cut a little bit more here. Okay. So we have our little bit of gnocchi here. So I have some water here that I'm going to bring up to a boil. I've just salted it a little bit. I've also added salt to the potatoes when I cooked them. I've added salt to the potatoes after I've processed them. So don't go crazy on your salt. You can always add more later after you taste. So we're going to wait for that. The next step is the pesto. So again, pesto, when you normally think of that, it's basil, fresh basil. What I mean when I say it's a wild herb pesto, I grow a wild greens garden in my back for pollinators. And one of the things I have in there is nettle, stinging nettles. They're great medicinally because the sting actually, you can use it for blood circulation. Nutritionally, they're super rich in iron. The thing is, at this point in the season, mine are actually overgrown. Once they grow to the point that they flower, the amount of iron in them, so I believe this is correct, the amount of iron in them actually gets too toxic for the human body. So you have to get them before they start to flower. But they're a delicious little green herb. As long as you grab them from underside of the leaves or with thick enough gloves, you won't get pricked. And the easiest way to make sure that you're not going to get them pricked when you eat is that you blanch them first in a bowl of hot water, boiling water, pull them out and put them in cold water. Okay, that's called blanching. It's just like a par cook. So to make my pesto, that's what I've done. This is majoritively nettles. It's also a little bit of kale from my garden that I've done the same process just to give it a bit of a bulk. As well as various herbs. I have a little bit of sage, a little bit of thyme, all from my garden. Now again, with recipes, like people are staunch supporters of like following traditional stuff. So the traditional pesto is garlic, basil, pine nuts, Parmesan cheese. You can always adjust that. If you don't like garlic, don't do garlic. If you like garlic so much, do extra. If you don't have basil, use other herbs like we're doing. Pine nuts, I was able to get some. I haven't had some in a while, so I decided to bring it in. If you don't like pine nuts, you can substitute it with something else that is nutty and fatty. So walnuts also have lots of fat and are a great nut. You can also change it and add sesame seeds. That also has a nuttiness. That also has a wonderful fat. You can also just like create your own whole process when you're making a pesto. So in here I have a little bit of garlic, a little bit of pine nuts. I'm going to add a good squeeze of lemon without the seeds. The lemon really helps cut through the fattiness of the pine nuts and the richness of the cheese. What else do I have? I'm going to add some salt. I'm using a mortar and pestle just because I'm doing a small amount. And the salt helps with the grip in the mortar and pestle for it to be ground up really well. You can also use it just in like a food processor or even a blender if you don't mind like a nice smooth paste.
So the salt makes it really hot.
Yeah, it's just like adding like little crystals into a big bowl. So as you're grinding it, the little crystals help break up the pine nuts. So I'm just going to pound this until it looks quite pasty. And as it starts to come together, instead of, I did have them, instead of wild herbs, because again my nettles are flowering, I'm going to use arugula. So this arugula, it's got a nice, great pepperiness to it and a wonderful green color. Again, we're trying to just consider all these flavors. So we have the peppery arugula, but we also added really nice pine nuts, which has so much fat, so it'll help. We're going to add a little bit of cheese, which has like a bit of sweetness. This might get loud. Just going to move all this stuff. No one needs cheese on the floor. Again, food processor recommended. You don't want to, unless you're angry, you want to just get something out. Okay, so everything's relatively mashed up. The arugula is, it's not as tender as the basil. If you are doing wild nettles and stuff, it won't be as tender as basil. So it'll either have a texture, or if you want it nice and smooth, you will need to process it. I'm also going to add a little bit of cheese. This is more of a demonstration. The amounts would probably be heavier on the arugula, maybe a bit lighter on the pine nuts. But this is more just to show you kind of the idea of it. We are going to use my nicer wild nettle pesto. And again, you can always change the balance of things. If you want it just really sharp, add more lemon. If you want it super, super rich, just add more cheese and pine nuts. That's about it. Simple, couple of ingredients. The garlic in there is going to have a nice sharpness to it as well. Now, the other thing I put into my nettle pesto is my miso. This is going to be a quite shameful plug. Miso is a Japanese product. It is normally a base of rice that you ferment soybeans into. I make mine using Northern Ontario organic ingredients. That means barley and yellow peas. So I inoculate barley and then mix in boiled yellow peas, and I let it ferment. Now this has been fermenting for about 4 months now, a little over 4 months. The salt content is very high. It's about 15 to 16%. Realistically, this can sit in your fridge for years. As long as it's kept cold, the process is halted, and with that salt content, bacteria, harmful bacteria, can't actually grow in there. This is the flavor of savory kept into a paste. So the basic recipe for a miso soup is a tablespoon of this with a cup of hot water. Now this is a living product. It's probiotic, just like yogurt or any of those other beautiful things. So if you boil it, it kills that, and it doesn't have as many health benefits. But it's also, there is always, with any probiotic, with any living cultured thing, there's always a chance of bacteria present. So if you are concerned about that, it is important to cook it out. So I add this just to that big, big boost of savoriness to it. It's also a great emulsifier. I use it in salad dressings all the time. So I'm going to add it here, and it's just going to bring a nice, rich, super, super great depth to the pesto, and it'll also help with the seasoning. Okay, so that's our pesto there. Our water is boiling. I'm going to add just a little bit more so it doesn't give us trouble. I've already added a touch of salt. And we are going to blanch off our gnocchi. When the gnocchi comes out of the water, I'm going to drain it a little bit, and I'm just going to try and get it a little brown. You can do it all in the pan. You don't have to bake it. I just find that it adds like such a nice flavor and such a nice like texture. It has like a crisp outside and a nice airy puffy interior. So I'm going to melt some butter and just toast it in some butter. So I can't clean up some of this. Sorry, Barbara. And then the other thing that we're going to be doing with this is some sauteed mushrooms. The mushrooms, again, Shane's mushrooms are fantastic. These are just oyster mushrooms. But his mushrooms are always, they're dry, which is a weird compliment for mushrooms. But if you've ever had just like old soggy mushrooms, they're disgusting. They don't cook well. His are always nice and clean, nice and trimmed. They have a wonderful, nice bite to them and texture. So I do love his product. I'm gonna add my gnocchi into the pot. It's not gonna take very long at all, so we do have to keep an eye on it. I'm gonna give it a quick mix just so that they don't stick together or stick to the bottom of the pot. But then I just want them to settle, and once the water starts coming up, once they start to cook, you see that they float. When they float, they're done. You just give them maybe 5 to 10 seconds and you'll be good. And then when that's done, I'm going to pop them into here. The mushrooms, again, we're going to do very simple. I'm just going to saute them. I'm going to add a touch of water, and then I'm going to add the nettle pesto, and then we're just going to toss it all together. I also have another little sauce that I'm going to be doing on the bottom for you guys. This is called a romesco sauce. It's a Spanish roasted red pepper sauce. It has almonds, smoked paprika, and a little bit of breadcrumbs. Try and get you guys to see this. So this has been boiling. If you look now, they're all floating to the top. Okay, so I'm just going to scoop them out. A little dry off right in the pan. Really doesn't take long at all. Again, the potatoes are cooked. There's a little bit of flour in there. That was maybe a third amount flour to potatoes, and then a little egg yolk, so it doesn't need much to actually cook. We'll give these a little toast. I'm gonna add just the smallest amount of salt, a little bit of oil so the butter doesn't get too dark on me. Looking pretty good there. I don't know if there's camera somewhere. You can see a little bit of caramelization happening. Just kind of the surfaces are getting a little bit nice and brown. That adds a lot of flavor. It adds just a wonderful, nice bite to them. You can also do gnocchi with a couple other ingredients. It is even harder, but I've done it with sweet potatoes. But sweet potatoes have so much more moisture when you cook them. that you really have to compensate and you really have to be careful getting a nice dry potato, using a bit more flour. But you can use lots of different roots, lots of different root veg, get creative. Actually, an easier alternative to gnocchi, it's called gnudi, G-N-U-D-I. And instead of a potato base, it actually uses ricotta cheese. And it's basically just cheese, flour, and a little bit of egg. That one's much more simple. You can just mix it all cold. Again, the texture is different. The ricotta cheese has a lot more moisture, but it is also very delicious. I've also done a vegan version of gnudi with a walnut cheese, it was basically just walnuts, flour, and a little bit of salt. That came out pretty well. So these are starting to get nice and brown. You can all see the color. I don't know where the cameras are. There we go. Okay, I'm just going to push this off to the side, and I'm going to start my mushrooms. Again, at this point, if I had more time, I could do it on a lower heat and just make sure everything gets nicely caramelized slowly, or I can throw it in the oven like we did with the other ones. For the mushrooms, a little bit of oil. They will absorb the oil, but if you do too much oil, it absorbs all the oil and then leaches it all out. I'm going to add a little bit of butter. And add a nice big handful of mushrooms. These are Shane's oyster mushrooms from Heartwood. Plug, plug. There's a lot of differing opinions on whether you should salt your mushrooms. The salt will take out the moisture immediately, so your mushrooms are more of a stewed mushroom. If you don't add the salt, you have a better chance to get them caramelized and get a nice kind of crispness to them. The thing is, realistically, with the majority of mushrooms, unless you have certain species of them that are really nice and dry, moisture is going to come out of them regardless of what you do. So they will more stew unless you just have a smoking hot pan and you only do a little bit at a time. With this, we'll maybe get a little bit of color on them, but the moisture will come out. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Once all that moisture comes out and it concentrates, it's just a super rich, delicious flavor. So that's what we're looking for. You can maybe see in the pan a lot of the oil is absorbed now. It looks very dry. If we continue to cook this, it'll release moisture. So we don't want to keep adding oil and oil and oil, because then once it starts releasing all that, it'll just be a big sloppy mess. It's good. Okay, if you look again, they're about half the size of what they were. Again, we're just kind of wilting them down as if you were to cook spinach or something, getting moisture out, concentrating the flavor. That can just kind of sit there. I'll have a little bit of water on hand. Also add a touch of lemon juice, because why not? I'm going to add a little bit of water just to get it going, get it stewed up. That'll be nice. Gnocchi, I'll put on a nice little toast again. This is one of my favorite sauces ever. I'm Portuguese, so we use a lot of paprika, a lot of smokiness. This one is just like super, super delicious. A little bit of savory, a little bit of sweet. The almonds are fantastic. I can add chilies to get some nice heat to it. It's coming along. The gnocchi, I'm just going to get warm. I'm going to add a couple spoonfuls of the pesto. I'll actually use this one too. I don't want to really cook the pesto too much. I just kind of want it to melt and be able to coat everything. There's no need to torture all the arugula and the miso that's in there, also the cheese. So there is a little bit of moisture coming out of the mushrooms now. It is pretty much evaporating as it comes out, which is nice. We're keeping them nice and dry. Again, that's also says a lot about heartwood mushrooms. If you get mushrooms from the store that have been there for a few days, when you cook them, it just looks like you added a soup to it or stock to it. It's just a big messy pile. Okay, gnocchi are heating up. I'm gonna add a little spoonful of this, a little spoonful of the one we made. See how it comes out. I'm gonna add just a little half spoonful of water just to help it dissolve. And it'll just kind of melt because there is a lot of olive oil in there. And it's just getting nicely coated. I lost one there. That'll be for me. Okay. So that's our gnocchi. The smell, you can get it immediately because we use the fresh garlic, the fresh pine nuts, and a little bit of cheese. It just has this wonderful, wonderful flavor to it. So I'm going to put this down. Okay, that can go off. There we go. Little bit of color on the mushrooms, which is great. Cast iron and inductions are really good for that. You can get cast iron pans really, really hot using inductions. But I mean, whatever you got, whatever your favorite pan is. You can also roast mushrooms. That's a good way. If you have them spread out well enough and you have an oven with a decent convection, if you just get a big whack load of mushrooms, lots of olive oil, salt, herbs, and you bake them, it gets nice and dry and has that crispness. It's really easy to do when you bake it. And then you could just toss it on top. You could toss it with the pasta to keep it warm. Okay, I'm gonna take this off. I'm gonna add another little bit of miso, shameful plug. Everyone see the label? There you go. And, sorry? It does, yes. It says the name of my company. Labels courtesy of, design is actually from one of my friends from Toronto who did a fantastic job. And then the labels were printed at OJ Graphics. So I'll just put a couple for show, because I want to save the rest for you guys. That's it. Again, some people are so diehard stuck on their recipes. You can find 80 different recipes for pesto online. You can find 100 for gnocchi. Just a lot of the principles are the same. Never feel afraid to change things up. If you like one herb more than the other, go for it. If you don't like something, omit it, and you can always just kind of work your way through it. But that is my dish, romesco sauce, potato gnocchi with a wild nettle pesto, and heartwood mushrooms just simply sauteed because they're fantastic. I have miso for sale at my booth. I will start packing up my booth very quickly because I have a 4-month baby that probably needs diaper changes, and I haven't hit my queue yet, my quota for the day because I've been here. There are heartwood mushrooms at Shane's Heartwood Mushroom Stand. Shane, if you're here, give me a shout. That is just depressing. Yeah, and for anyone who is interested in my food, you can always check my Instagram. I do dinners, I do markets when I'm not changing diapers. Things will probably slow down for the winter, but I always try and be active during the summer. I also hate social media, so it's been good to have an excuse to not post things every day. But yeah, I will whip upstairs, get those gnocchi, and I'll start pushing them out. Sorry. Thank you everyone.
Can you place with that for me?
Yeah, sure.